Sometimes, the wrong message finds the right person at the exact moment your life is falling apart. The refrigerator hummed louder than it should have, a low, uneven buzz that filled the tiny apartment like a warning she couldn't ignore, and Olivia Bennet sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, her back pressed against the edge of a second-hand couch that sagged in the middle, staring at the crumpled rent bill in her trembling hands as the soft whimper of her baby drifted from the small crib just a few feet away. The kind of sound that wasn't quite crying yet, but could turn into it any second if. She didn't move, didn't fix something, didn't make the world steady again. But she didn't move. Not yet, because the number printed at the bottom of that bill refused to change no matter how long she looked at it. $1,240 due by tomorrow, bold and unforgiving. In her bank app, she had already checked it 3 times, still showed $17.32. A number so small it felt almost like an insult, like the universe had decided to be precise about her failure, not even rounding it up to 20, and her phone lay face up beside her knee, the cracked screen catching the dim light from the single lamp in the room. Notifications silent, no miracles arriving, no unexpected calls, just the quiet weight of reality pressing in from every side, while the baby monitor crackled softly and then went still again, as if even it was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next, and Olivia exhaled slowly. The kind of breath that came out shaky no matter how hard she tried to control it, before reaching for her phone with fingers that felt colder than they should have been, opening her messages, and scrolling to the contact labeled landlord, because there wasn't anyone else left to ask, not anymore, not since her sister moved out of state and stopped picking up calls that sounded like emergencies. Not since her last paycheck disappeared into groceries and formula and the electric bill that had already come with a warning notice. And she tapped the screen, hesitated, deleted, typed again. Each word heavier than the last, as if admitting the truth would somehow make it more permanent, more real, and finally she wrote, "Hi, I'm really sorry, but I need 3 more days to pay the rent. I'll have it by Friday. I promise." And she stared at it, reading it twice, then 3 times, wondering if it sounded desperate, wondering if it sounded like a lie even though it wasn't, wondering if promises still meant anything when you didn't have anything to back them up with except hope. And for a second, she almost didn't send it, her thumb hovering over the button while her baby let out a soft cry that broke through the silence like a fragile thread snapping. And that was enough, that tiny sound, that reminder of someone who depended on her completely. So she pressed send before she could change her mind, and the message whooshed away into the quiet, carrying everything she couldn't say out loud. And Olivia let her hand fall into her lap, her shoulders slumping as if she had just finished something much bigger than typing a few sentences, because asking for help always felt like losing a small piece of yourself. And the room seemed even quieter now, the hum of the refrigerator returning, the faint ticking of a clock she didn't remember buying, the distant sound of a car passing outside, normal life continuing somewhere else, somewhere easier, while she waited, just waited, for a response that might not come at all. And somewhere miles away, high above a city that glittered with glass and steel, a phone vibrated once against a polished conference table, unnoticed at first among the low murmur of executives discussing numbers that had too many zeros to feel real, until the man at the head of the table, Lucas Harrington, glanced down, almost absent-mindedly, expecting another update, another report, another routine interruption, but what he saw instead made him pause, his eyes narrowing slightly as he read the message that had no business being on his phone, a message that was clearly not meant for him, and yet something about it, the simplicity, the urgency, the quiet dignity wrapped inside those few words, made his finger hover over the screen instead of swiping it away, because it wasn't just a wrong number, not to him, not in that moment, and back in her small apartment. Olivia didn't know that yet, didn't know that her mistake had already landed somewhere unexpected, somewhere powerful, somewhere that could change everything. And as her baby's cry grew a little louder, she pushed herself up from the floor, wiping quickly at her eyes before walking toward the crib, whispering softly, "It's okay. I've got you." Even though she wasn't sure how, not yet, but she said it anyway, because sometimes saying it was the only thing keeping everything from falling apart. The baby's crying softened the moment Olivia lifted her from the crib, the small weight settling against her chest as if it belonged there more than anywhere else in the world. And for a few seconds, everything else faded. The rent, the numbers, the fear, all of it replaced by the simple rhythm of her daughter's breathing against her shoulder while she paced slowly across the narrow living room, bare feet brushing against the cool floor, whispering soft reassurances she hoped sounded more certain than she felt. I know, it is okay. Mommy is here. Even though a part of her wondered if being there was enough when she could not even guarantee a roof over their heads in less than 24 hours, and the thought made her tighten her hold just a little, as if she could physically shield her child from a future she could not yet fix. And then her phone buzzed, a sharp, sudden vibration that cut through the quiet like a spark, and Olivia froze mid-step, her heart skipping. Once before she glanced toward the couch where she had left it, because there was only one person who would respond tonight. Only one person who had the power to decide what happened next, and for a brief moment hope rose too quickly, too dangerously, before she carefully laid her baby back down, smoothing the tiny blanket with gentle hands, waiting until the soft whimper settled into silence again, and then she reached for the phone, her fingers hovering as if the screen might change depending on how she touched it. And when she finally looked, the message was not what she expected, not at all. I think you have the wrong number. The words were simple, neutral, almost polite, but they landed heavier than any rejection could have, and Olivia felt the air leave her lungs in a quiet rush, her stomach dropping as realization hit her all at once, sharp and immediate. She had typed the number wrong. Of course she had. She had been rushing, distracted, tired beyond thinking clearly, and now the one chance she had just slipped through her fingers without even reaching the right person. An embarrassment burned up her neck as she quickly typed back, her thumbs moving faster this time. I am so sorry. That was not meant for you. Please ignore that message. And she hit send before she could overthink it, before she could sit in the shame any longer than necessary, because there was nothing else to do, nothing to fix it now. And she let the phone fall back onto the couch, pressing the heel of her hand briefly against her forehead as if she could push the mistake out of existence. Of course, she whispered under her breath, a humorless breath of a laugh escaping, because even her mistakes seemed to arrive at the worst possible moment, and she turned away, already bracing herself to figure out another plan that did not exist yet, when the phone buzzed again, and this time the sound felt different, unexpected, like something that was not supposed to happen twice, and she hesitated before looking, almost afraid it would be something worse, something that would make her feel even smaller, but when she picked it up, the message waiting on the screen made her blink in confusion. Is your baby going to be okay? And for a second Olivia just stared at it, her mind struggling to connect the words to the situation, because that was not what strangers asked, not after being told they had received the wrong message, not after being given a clear exit, and she found herself glancing toward the crib as if the answer might be there instead of on the screen. An instinct kicked in before caution could fully form. She will be fine. She typed back, shorter this time. Guarded? Thank you, and I am sorry again. And she hovered, considering whether to add anything else, whether to explain, whether to shut it down completely, because every story she had ever heard told her to be careful, to not trust people who appeared out of nowhere offering help, especially not when she was this vulnerable, this exposed. But exhaustion had a way of lowering defenses, of making the line between caution and connection feel thinner than it should, and before she could decide, another message appeared, faster this time, almost as if the person on the other end had not looked away from the conversation at all. You do not sound fine. And Olivia's chest tightened at that, not because the words were intrusive, but because they were accurate in a way she had not expected, and she did not respond right away, her fingers resting on the screen while her thoughts moved slower than usual, weighed down by everything she had been holding in, because admitting the truth, even to a stranger, felt dangerous in its own way, like opening a door she might not be able to close again. And yet something about the tone, calm, steady, without pressure, made it harder to dismiss. And across the city, in a room where silence usually meant control, Lucas Harrington leaned back slightly in his chair, the conversation around him fading into the background as he read the last message again, his attention no longer on the deal being discussed, but on the unseen person behind a screen who had not asked for his attention and yet somehow held it anyway. And for the first time that night, he set his pen down completely, as if he had just decided that this, whatever this was, mattered enough to stay. Olivia stared at the screen longer than she meant to. The words, "You do not sound fine," lingering in a way that felt too personal for someone she had never met. And her first instinct was to put the phone down, to end it there before it became something else, something harder to control. But her fingers did not move. They stayed resting lightly against the glass, as if waiting for permission her mind had not yet given. And across the room her baby shifted softly in the crib, a small rustle of fabric followed by a quiet sigh that reminded Olivia exactly why she had sent that message in the first place. Why she was even here, sitting in the middle of a problem she could not solve. Alone, and slowly she inhaled, steadying herself, before typing back. "It has just been a long day." The sentence simple, careful, offering just enough truth without opening too much. But even as she sent it, she knew it was not convincing, not even to herself, because long days did not usually come with eviction notices and empty bank accounts. And she pressed her lips together, glancing once more toward the crib, then back to the phone, as if expecting it to go quiet now that she had given a polite answer. But it did not. The reply came almost immediately. "Long days usually end. Yours sounds like it is still getting worse." And Olivia let out a breath she did not realize she was holding. A faint, surprised exhale that carried more emotion than she intended, because there was something disarming about being understood without having to explain everything. Something that made her guard slip just a fraction, and she found herself sitting back down on the edge of the couch, the fabric dipping beneath her weight as she typed again, slower this time. "I am behind on rent. I thought I was texting my landlord. I just need a few more days." She paused, then added, "I will figure it out." Because that part mattered, because she needed it to be true even if she did not know how yet. And for a moment there was no response, a stretch of silence that felt longer than it probably was. Enough time for doubt to creep back in. Enough time for her to regret saying anything at all. And she almost reached to lock the phone, to put an end to whatever this was before it could disappoint her, when the screen lit up again. And this time the message was different, shorter, more direct. "How much?" And Olivia blinked, her brows drawing together in confusion as she read it again. The question simple but unexpected, and her first reaction was hesitation, immediate and instinctive. Because this was the part where things usually came with conditions, with expectations, with something attached that she could not afford to give. And her fingers hovered as she considered not answering, as she considered ending it right there. But the thought of tomorrow pressed in again, the image of her belongings packed into boxes, of nowhere to go with a baby in her arms. And that fear overpowered caution just enough for her to type the number. 1,240, she hesitated, then added, "I am not asking you for anything. I just answered your question." And she hit send quickly, almost defensively, as if needing to draw a line before it could be crossed. And then she set the phone down beside her, her heart beating a little faster now, unsure of what she had just opened, unsure of what would come next. And in a high-rise office where the city lights reflected off glass walls and polished surfaces, Lucas Harrington read the number without expression, his gaze steady, calculating in a way that had built empires and closed deals. But this was different. There were no contracts here, no negotiations, just a single figure attached to a situation that did not belong in his world, and yet had found its way into it anyway, and without saying a word to anyone in the room. He reached for his phone, his attention fully shifted now, the conversation around him fading into background noise as he made a decision that required no committee, no approval, just intent. And back in her apartment, Olivia rubbed her hands together slowly, trying to warm them, trying to calm the restless energy building in her chest as she stared at the dark screen, telling herself not to expect anything, telling herself that this was just a strange conversation that would end like all the others, quietly, without changing anything. And yet when the phone vibrated again, her heart reacted before her mind could stop it, a sharp, sudden beat that carried something dangerously close to hope. The vibration in Olivia's hand felt louder this time, sharper, like it carried weight, and she did not open the message right away, her thumb hovering over the screen as if delaying it could somehow control what it said, because hope had a way of hurting more than disappointment when it was misplaced, and she had learned that the hard way, slowly, over months of trying to hold everything together with too little. But the silence stretched just long enough to make her chest tighten, so she exhaled and tapped the screen, her eyes scanning the message once, then again, as if it might change if she blinked. But it did not. "Send me your payment app." And for a second Olivia did not react at all, her mind pausing, struggling to catch up with what she was reading, because it did not fit into any pattern she understood. It did not sound like a scam. It did not sound like a joke. It was too direct, too simple, and that made it harder to process. And her first instinct was suspicion, immediate and protective, because no one offered help like that without a reason, without something behind it. And she found herself sitting up straighter, her shoulders tensing as she typed back, slower now, more deliberate. "I do not think that is necessary. I am not asking you for money." And she stared at the message for a moment before sending it, as if hoping it would close the door gently instead of slamming it shut. But the reply came just as quickly, as if the other person had expected that answer. "I know you are not asking. I am offering." And Olivia's breath caught slightly at the difference, at the way the words shifted the balance of the conversation without forcing anything. And she pressed her lips together, her gaze drifting toward the crib again, where her baby slept quietly, unaware of numbers and deadlines and the invisible line they were standing on. And the thought hit her harder than anything else. Not pride, not fear, but the quiet, steady responsibility of keeping that small life safe. And she looked back at the phone, her defenses still there but no longer as solid as they had been a few minutes ago. "Why?" she typed, the question simple but loaded with everything she could not fully say. And for the first time there was a pause on the other end, a few seconds that stretched long enough for her to feel it. And when the answer came, it was not what she expected. "Because I can." And Olivia let out a small, almost incredulous breath, the corner of her mouth twitching in a way that was not quite a smile, not quite disbelief, but something in between, because that was not how people usually explained things, not in her world, where everything came with reasons and conditions and trade-offs. And yet there was something steady in that answer, something that did not try to convince her, did not try to earn trust, just existed as it was. And she looked down at her hands, at the faint marks where she had been gripping the rent bill earlier, at the subtle shake that had not fully gone away, and she realized how tired she was of carrying everything alone, how exhausting it had become to say no to help that might not come again. And still, she hesitated. Because trust was not something she gave easily anymore, not after learning how quickly it could be misplaced, and she typed slowly, carefully, "I do not want to owe anyone." And this time the response came softer, measured. "Then do not think of it as owing. Think of it as someone remembering what it feels like to need help." And the words settled differently, not pushing, not pulling, just offering a perspective she had not allowed herself to consider. And Olivia closed her eyes for a brief second, letting that sink in, letting the possibility exist without immediately rejecting it. And when she opened them again, she made a decision that felt both small and significant at the same time. She copied her payment handle into the message field, stared at it for a long second, then pressed send before she could second-guess it. And the moment it left her screen, her heart started beating faster, not with certainty, but with something fragile, something uncertain, and she set the phone down beside her, her hands now completely still, as if moving might disturb whatever was about to happen. And across the city, Lucas Harrington glanced down at the incoming information, his expression unchanged, his movements precise as he entered a number without hesitation, his thumb pausing for only a fraction of a second before confirming the transfer, a decision made with the same clarity he used in boardrooms, but for a reason that had nothing to do with profit or strategy. And back in the quiet apartment, Olivia waited, the seconds stretching thin and fragile, until her phone lit up again with a notification that did not look like a message this time. And when she saw the amount, her breath left her in a way that felt almost unreal, not because it was exactly what she needed, but because it was more, far more than she had dared to hope for, enough to cover not just tomorrow, but the days after it, enough to create space where there had only been pressure. And her hand rose slowly to her mouth, her eyes blurring as emotion caught up with her all at once, not just relief, but something deeper, something she had not felt in a long time, the quiet, overwhelming realization that for the first time in months, someone had seen her struggle, and chosen to do something about it without asking for anything in return. The apartment felt different that night, not because anything had changed physically, but because the pressure that once filled every corner had softened, like the air itself had been given space to breathe, and Olivia stood by the small kitchen counter, gently shaking the bottle in her hand, watching the formula settle as the faint light above flickered once before steadying. A detail she would have noticed before with frustration, but now simply accepted as part of the room. And when she turned back toward the crib, her movements were slower, calmer, no longer rushed by the constant ticking of fear that had followed her all day. And as she lifted her baby into her arms again, the warmth against her chest felt grounding in a way that reached deeper than before, as if the moment itself had shifted from survival to something closer to peace, even if only temporarily. And she sat down on the edge of the couch, cradling the small bottle carefully, guiding it gently as her baby began to feed. The quiet rhythm returning, soft and steady, and Olivia allowed herself to lean back slightly, her shoulders easing as she watched the tiny movements. The way her daughter's hand curled instinctively against her shirt, holding on without thinking, trusting without question, and that trust settled over her in a way that felt both comforting and humbling. Because for the first time in weeks, she did not feel like she was about to fail it, and her gaze drifted toward her phone resting beside her. The screen now dark again, silent after everything that had just happened, and she reached for it slowly, not with urgency this time, but with quiet intention, unlocking it and scrolling back through the conversation, reading each message again, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to understand it, to make sense of something that did not follow the rules she had come to expect, and the simplicity of it all stood out more now. No pressure, no questions that crossed boundaries, no attempt to gain anything in return, just a series of choices that led to a moment she had not believed possible earlier that night, and she found herself typing again, her fingers moving with more certainty this time. "I meant what I said. I will not forget this," she paused, then added, "My name is Olivia." Because it felt important now, because it felt wrong to leave that part unspoken after everything else had been shared, even in fragments, and she sent the message, setting the phone down once more without waiting, because for the first time she did not feel the need to chase a response. And across the city, Lucas Harrington had just stepped out of the conference room, the low murmur of voices fading behind him as the door closed, leaving him in a quieter hallway lined with glass and muted light. And he glanced down at his phone as it buzzed softly in his hand, his expression unchanged as he read the new message, his eyes lingering briefly on the name before something subtle shifted, not visible, not something anyone around him would notice, but present, enough to slow his next step just slightly, and he typed back without hesitation, "Lucas." No title, no explanation, just the name, equal in its simplicity. And when Olivia's phone lit up again, she saw it immediately, the single word carrying more weight than she expected, not because it revealed anything significant, but because it felt like a bridge, a small but real connection between two lives that had no reason to cross paths, and yet had done so anyway. And she let out a quiet breath, a soft exhale that carried a hint of something lighter than before, something that had not been there earlier in the night. And she leaned her head back against the couch, her eyes closing for a brief moment as the steady sound of her baby feeding filled the room, and for the first time in a long time, the silence did not feel heavy, it felt safe. And even as questions lingered in the background, questions about who he was, why he had helped, what this meant beyond tonight, she did not rush to answer them, because some moments did not need to be solved immediately, some moments were meant to be felt, to be held onto for just a little longer before reality returned. And as the night settled around her, Olivia allowed herself to sit in that space, in the quiet certainty that for now, for this moment, everything was going to be okay, even if she did not yet know what tomorrow would bring. The hallway outside her apartment felt longer than usual, not because it had changed, but because Olivia walked through it differently, her steps steady, her shoulders no longer hunched as if bracing for something unseen, and the soft morning light followed her down the narrow corridor until she pushed open the building's front door and stepped into the crisp air, the kind that carried the faint scent of pavement and distant coffee shops beginning their day. And she adjusted her hold on her baby, pulling the small blanket a little closer around her before starting toward the bus stop at the corner. the familiar route now carrying a different weight, not heavy, but meaningful in a way she had not felt in months. And when she reached into her pocket to check her phone, the screen lit up easily. The conversation still there, unchanged but no longer uncertain, and she paused for a moment before typing, her thumb moving with quiet intention. "I am on my way now." She hesitated, then added, "to pay it," as if saying it out loud, even in a message, made it more real. And when she sent it, she slipped the phone back into her pocket, not waiting this time, because she did not need reassurance in the same way she had before. She simply needed to follow through. And the bus arrived with a low hiss of brakes, the doors opening with a familiar mechanical sound that echoed slightly in the morning stillness, and she stepped on, nodding briefly to the driver as she made her way to a seat near the window, settling carefully with her baby resting against her chest. And as the bus pulled away, the city began to move around her, buildings passing by in steady rhythm, people walking with purpose along the sidewalks. And for the first time in a long while, Olivia felt like she was part of that movement again, not stuck, not falling behind, but moving forward in a way that felt real. And when her phone vibrated softly in her pocket, she pulled it out without urgency, glancing down to see the message. Waiting for her. Good. And then a second one followed. "Let me know when it is done." And she read it twice, a small, thoughtful pause settling over her, because the words did not feel controlling, did not feel like a demand. They felt like something else, something closer to quiet accountability, and she nodded slightly to herself before typing back, "I will." And as she sent it, the bus slowed near her stop, the familiar storefront coming into view, and she stood carefully, stepping down onto the sidewalk with measured movements, the weight of the moment settling in as she approached the small leasing office, the door marked with simple lettering that had once felt intimidating now appearing almost ordinary. And she paused just outside for a brief second, adjusting her hold on her baby, taking in a slow breath before pushing the door open, the small bell above it chiming softly as she stepped inside. And the air carried the faint scent of paper and cleaning supplies, a neutral space that felt more manageable than it had the night before. And she walked up to the counter, her voice steady as she spoke to the woman behind it, explaining that she was there to make her payment. And as the transaction processed, the simple act of handing over the money felt almost surreal, not because it was difficult, but because it had nearly been impossible just hours ago. And when the receipt printed, the soft sound of the paper sliding out felt like a quiet confirmation, something solid, something real. And she took it carefully, glancing down at it for a moment before folding it neatly and placing it in her bag. And as she stepped back outside into the morning light, she reached for her phone again, unlocking it with a calm she had not felt the night before, and typing, "It is done." And this time she did not rush to send it. She looked at the words for a second, letting them settle, before pressing the screen. And when the reply came, it was simple, almost understated, "I knew you would." And Olivia stood there for a moment, the noise of the city moving around her, cars passing, distant voices blending into the background. But her focus remained on those words, because they carried something she had not realized she needed. Not just help, not just relief, but belief. And she exhaled slowly, her gaze lifting from the screen to the world in front of her. And for the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like something she had to fear. It felt like something she could step into, one decision at a time. And as she adjusted the blanket around her baby and started walking again, the message from the night before echoed quietly in her mind, not as a question anymore, but as something that had already proven itself true. Sometimes the wrong message does not lead to a mistake. Sometimes it leads exactly where it was meant to go.